It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world.
That may have been true in 1796, but when the US was attacked in 2001, they called on their 60-year-old alliance for backup. There are currently 130,000 troops from 47 nations operating under ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force. But NATO countries provide the leadership and the bulk of the manpower. The only problem is, Afghanistan is a long way from the North Atlantic. The logic?
Defense of our territory and our citizens doesn't begin and end at the border. It can start in Kandahar, it can start in cyberspace, and NATO needs to be able to defend across the spectrum.
They're certainly happy that the Afghan and ISAF forces are here. And
NATO claims to be winning the war in Afghanistan.
Well, I don't really believe it. A year ago I was in one of the streets just down there taking cover as bullets whizzed past my head. 12 months on, I'm standing here and I've got no helmet on and just everything's really chilled out.
Really? 2010 is make or break for the American and NATO forces in Afghanistan. But despite the surge, the Taliban are still there in force. So what went wrong?
The Taliban can't be defeated militarily. The Taliban have regrouped in the way that guerrilla forces do. Bin Laden, has never been captured. And one very dangerous consequence of the war has been the way in which it's destabilised Pakistan.
The former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO in Europe, General John Craddock, is scathing, saying,
NATO would need to reach a consensus on a decision to no longer need to reach a consensus.
The cornerstone of NATO is Article 5, the principle of one for all and all for one. But there is no such unity of purpose.
Many of the European forces operate under very restricted conditions, which makes the whole thing, I don't think it's the main reason why they're failing, but it makes the whole thing even more shambolic, really.
When you read the fine print, many NATO countries are unwilling to support their allies and actually fight. They have built-in opt-out clauses or caveats, including not fighting in the most dangerous areas, only firing their weapons in self-defense, not conducting missions at night. Some troops can't take part in any counter-narcotics operations, not fighting in snow. And remember, Afghan winters are quite cold. With more than 50 such caveats, US soldiers now joke that ISAF stands for I Saw Americans Fight. The first chink in NATO's armour appeared in August this year, when the Dutch withdrew their troops from Afghanistan. You can't blame European leaders. They are asked to cash a cheque, the Americans wrote.
The shots ultimately called in Washington. The NATO presence helps to relieve the burden somewhat on the US. They don't have to cover the whole country. It gives them a gloss of legitimacy, but how much difference it makes to the actual military balance of forces, particularly in the south, where the serious fighting is going on, I'm very doubtful.
And as the body count rises, currently at least 2,223, the political costs do too.
We are all convinced that it would be better to leave quickly.
Afghanistan, I would say, is a trap.
We cannot be there for another 5 years, having been there for effectively 9 years already.
Perhaps Churchill, who had experience with alliances, summed it up best. The only thing worse than fighting a war with allies is fighting a war without them.